Russia is preparing for war with Israel, and most people have no idea that this conflict was prophesied 2,600 years ago with stunning accuracy. The prophet Ezekiel described a massive invasion of Israel, led by a nation from the far north, that would trigger the greatest supernatural intervention in human history since the flood of Noah. Current geopolitical alignments are matching this ancient prophecy with frightening precision. And what I am about to show you will prove that we may be witnessing the setup for the biblical war of Gog and Magog right before our eyes. Every weapons shipment to Iran, every military alliance between Russia and Islamic nations, every threat against Israel is moving us closer to a prophetic confrontation that will reshape the Middle East and demonstrate God's power to the entire world. Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand why this war is inevitable, why it will shock the world, and why its outcome was determined before the first missile is fired. The prophecy of Gog and Magog appears in Ezekiel chapters 38 and 39, written approximately 2,600 years ago when Israel was in exile, and most of the nations mentioned in the prophecy did not even exist yet. Ezekiel describes a massive end-times invasion of Israel, led by a ruler called Gog from the land of Magog, along with a coalition of specific nations that would attempt to destroy Israel and plunder its wealth. But what makes this prophecy remarkable is not just its antiquity, but its precision in describing geopolitical relationships that are forming in our generation for the first time in history. Let me walk you through exactly what Ezekiel prophesied and how current world events are aligning with his vision with stunning accuracy. The prophecy begins in Ezekiel chapter 38 verse 2, where God tells the prophet, "Son of man, set your face against Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him." The identity of these ancient names has been debated for centuries, but historical and linguistic evidence points to modern Russia as the primary fulfillment of this prophecy. Magog appears in Genesis chapter 10 as one of the sons of Japheth, whose descendants settled in the regions north of the Black Sea and Caucasus Mountains. Ancient historians like Josephus identified Magog with the Scythians who inhabited the area that is now southern Russia and Ukraine. Meshech and Tubal correspond to ancient peoples who lived in what is now eastern Turkey and southern Russia. The phrase chief prince in Hebrew is Rosh Nasi, where Rosh means head or chief, leading many scholars to see a connection to Russia itself. But the geographic clue that confirms this interpretation is found in verse 6, from the far north, and verse 15, "You will come from your place out of the far north." From Israel's perspective, the farthest north you can go in the ancient world leads directly to Russia. No other major power is positioned in the far north of Israel with the military capability to lead such an invasion. Modern Russia controls the largest land mass of any nation, possesses one of the world's most powerful militaries, and has been building anti-Israel alliances throughout the Middle East for decades. But Gog will not invade alone. Ezekiel provides a detailed list of coalition partners that reads like a who's who of modern nations that are currently hostile to Israel. Verse 5 mentions Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them. Persia is modern Iran, which has repeatedly threatened to wipe Israel off the map and is the primary sponsor of terrorist groups like Hamas and Hezbollah. Ethiopia likely refers to the ancient kingdom of Kush, which included parts of modern Sudan and Ethiopia. Libya is explicitly named and has been in chaos since the fall of Muammar Gaddafi, creating opportunities for radical Islamic groups to gain power. Verse 6 adds Gomer and all its troops. The house of Togarmah from the far north and all its troops. Many people are with you. Gomer appears to represent parts of modern Turkey, which under President Erdogan has become increasingly hostile to Israel and has been building relationships with Russia and Iran. Togarmah is also associated with Turkey and Armenia. What makes this coalition so significant is that, for most of history, these nations were either non-existent powerless, or aligned with different superpowers. But today, for the first time since Ezekiel's prophecy was written, Russia is building military and economic partnerships with precisely the nations mentioned in this ancient text. Iran and Russia have formed a military alliance in Syria. Turkey has been purchasing Russian weapons systems despite being a NATO member. Libya has been accepting Russian military contractors and equipment. Sudan has been seeking Russian military cooperation. These relationships were impossible during the Soviet era, when Russia was officially atheistic and opposed to Islamic nations. And they were unlikely during the Cold War, when global alliances were determined by opposition to Western capitalism. Only in our current multipolar world has it become possible for Russia to lead exactly the coalition that Ezekiel described. But why will this coalition invade Israel? Ezekiel provides several motivations that perfectly match current Middle Eastern dynamics. First, economic plunder. To take plunder and to take booty, to stretch out your hand against the waste places that are again inhabited, and against a people gathered from the nations, who have acquired livestock and goods, who dwell in the midst of the land. Israel today is one of the wealthiest nations per capita in the Middle East, with a thriving technology sector, significant natural gas reserves, and agricultural innovations that have made the desert bloom. The nation that was a desolate wasteland for centuries has become an economic powerhouse exactly as Ezekiel predicted. Second, strategic positioning. Israel controls crucial trade routes and has become a major player in Eastern Mediterranean energy markets through its natural gas discoveries. Controlling Israel would give the Gog coalition dominance over Middle Eastern energy supplies and shipping lanes. Third, the elimination of Western influence. Israel represents Western democratic values and American influence in a region where Russia, Iran, and their allies want to establish their own spheres of influence. Destroying Israel would strike a major blow against American power in the Middle East. But Ezekiel also provides the timing for this invasion, and this is where current events become particularly alarming. The prophecy states that this war will occur in the latter years when Israel is regathered from the nations and living securely in unwalled villages. For most of history, this scenario was impossible because Israel did not exist as a nation, and the Jewish people were scattered across the globe. But since 1948, Israel has been regathered from over 100 nations in the greatest population migration in human history. Today, more Jews live in Israel than anywhere else in the world, fulfilling the regathering prophecy. The phrase about unwalled villages initially seems puzzling, since Israel is one of the most militarized nations on earth. But in ancient times, walls represented a city's primary defense system. Today, Israel's defense relies not on physical walls around every city, but on advanced military technology, intelligence systems, and international alliances. Most Israeli cities and towns have no physical walls, exactly matching Ezekiel's description of unwalled villages. The timing phrase "when they dwell safely" has been interpreted various ways, but it may refer to Israel's confidence in its military superiority and security guarantees from allies like the United States. Despite constant threats, Israel has achieved a level of prosperity and normalcy that would have been unimaginable to previous generations of Jews who faced persecution and exile. Current events suggest that we may be approaching the trigger point for this prophesied invasion. Russia's military involvement in Syria has brought Russian forces to Israel's northern border for the first time in history. Iran's Revolutionary Guard has established bases in Syria and Lebanon, creating an arc of hostility around Israel. Turkey has been moving toward the Russian-Iranian axis despite its NATO membership. Recent conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon have demonstrated both Israel's military capabilities and its isolation in international opinion. The Biden administration's perceived weakness and the uncertainty surrounding future American support for Israel may be creating the opening that the Gog coalition needs to believe an invasion could succeed. But here is what makes this prophecy so remarkable. Ezekiel not only predicted the invasion, but also its supernatural defeat. God declares in chapter 38 verse 18, "And it will come to pass at the same time, when Gog comes against the land of Israel, says the Lord God, that my fury will show in my face." The defeat of this massive invasion will not come through superior Israeli military technology or American intervention. It will come through direct supernatural intervention that will be unmistakably divine in origin. Chapter 38 verses 19 to 22 describe earthquakes, mountains falling, pestilence, bloodshed, flooding rain, great hailstones, fire and brimstone. The invading armies will be so confused that they will attack each other, and only 1/6 of the invasion force will survive to return home. This supernatural destruction will be so obvious and overwhelming that it will trigger a global recognition of God's power. Chapter 39 verse 7 states, "So I will make my holy name known in the midst of my people Israel, and I will not let them profane my holy name anymore. Then the nations shall know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel." The war of Gog and Magog will serve as a massive evangelistic event that will turn hearts around the world back to God. But this war will also have other prophetic consequences that help us understand its timing in relation to end times events. First, it will eliminate Israel's major enemies and create a period of peace and security that will allow for the rebuilding of the temple and the rise of the Antichrist. Second, it will demonstrate God's supernatural power in a way that will make it easier for the Antichrist to perform signs and wonders that deceive the world. Third, it will shift global power structures and create the conditions for the final world empire described in Daniel and Revelation. Some Bible scholars believe the Gog and Magog war will occur before the rapture of the church, while others place it during the tribulation period. The timing details in Ezekiel suggest it happens when Israel is dwelling securely, which might indicate either the current period of relative peace or the false peace that the Antichrist will negotiate during the first half of the tribulation. Regardless of the exact timing, current geopolitical developments suggest this war is approaching rapidly. Every news report about Russian military cooperation with Iran, every Turkish shift away from NATO, every threat against Israel from the coalition nations mentioned in Ezekiel brings us closer to this prophetic climax. So what does this mean for believers today? First, it confirms the reliability of biblical prophecy and should strengthen your faith in God's Word. The fact that ancient prophecies written 2,600 years ago are aligning with current events with such precision proves that the Bible is not human speculation, but divine revelation. Second, it demonstrates that current world events are not random, but are unfolding according to God's prophetic plan. Wars, conflicts, and international tensions that seem chaotic to human observers are actually moving history toward its appointed climax. Third, it creates urgency about evangelism, because this war will result in a great spiritual awakening as nations recognize God's supernatural intervention. People who witness this divine victory will be more open to the gospel than at any time in recent history. Fourth, it should motivate believers to support Israel through prayer and advocacy. While Israel will be supernaturally protected during this invasion, the nation faces increasing international isolation and needs the support of Bible-believing Christians who understand God's covenant promises. But most importantly, the approaching war of Gog and Magog should inspire believers to live with eternal perspective and readiness for Christ's return. If we are close enough to see the setup for this major prophetic event, we may also be close to the rapture of the church and the beginning of the tribulation period. This is not a time for spiritual complacency or worldly distraction, but for watchfulness, prayer, and faithful service until Christ comes. The Russian military buildup in Syria, the Iranian expansion across the Middle East, the Turkish shift toward anti-Western policies, and the increasing isolation of Israel are not just current events. They are prophetic developments that were foretold centuries ago. We are watching Ezekiel's vision unfold before our eyes, and the supernatural conclusion to this conflict will shock the world and demonstrate once again that the God of Israel is the sovereign Lord of history. I want you to think carefully about the implications of what we have discussed. If the war of Gog and Magog is indeed approaching, what does that mean for your life, your priorities, your spiritual preparation? Are you ready for a world-changing demonstration of God's power that will force everyone on earth to acknowledge His sovereignty? Leave a comment below and tell me what you think about the connections between current Middle Eastern politics and Ezekiel's prophecy. Do you see the same alignment between ancient predictions and modern developments? How should believers respond to the growing tensions in the region? The war of Gog and Magog will be unlike any conflict in human history, because its outcome will be determined not by military strategy or technological superiority, but by the sovereign intervention of the God who made covenant promises to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Russia may be powerful, Iran may be determined, and their coalition may be large, but they will discover that he who touches Israel touches the apple of God's eye, and that no weapon formed against Israel will prosper. If this message has opened your eyes to the prophetic significance of current world events, make sure to subscribe to this channel and hit that notification